All right, now, let's head over to the eNCA money desk now, where my colleague Devan Murugan is joining me, and he's standing by. I mean, Devan, good afternoon. It seems it's a bloodbath when I'm observing from the market's perspective. This as coronavirus fears intensify, but also it seems that stocks are plunging right now.
Yeah, you were talking about the coronavirus throughout the entire bulletin, and I can tell you right now there's linkages all over. Markets are taking a hit. So the JSE All-Share Index has plunged around about another 2,000 points since this morning's opening as the coronavirus fears send global markets on a deep slide. Investors ditched risky assets on fears the virus will become a pandemic and trigger a global recession. World stock markets are heading, by the way, for the worst week since the depths of the 2008 financial crisis. Locally, the rand is down, well, at least at one point today, 20 cents weaker against the US dollar from yesterday's close, as emerging market currencies are hit again by this fear of the virus. Right, so very quickly, we're going to chat to Nesan Nair from Sasfin about that. But before we do that, a quick look at the damage on the JSE as we ready to close the week. And you can see the red all over your screen there. The all-share down 3.3%. That was about 2,000 points from yesterday's or Friday's close. Turn over to the mining shares and you'll see ordinarily you would have thought that gold would have boosted up the gold mining shares. Not the case. 9% in the red for the gold mining shares. Platinum shares also down. Resources overall also in the red. Let's check out the commodity prices, where you'll find that the oil price, on fears that perhaps the world economy will not be growing as fast in the midst of this virus, it's down $50.42 a barrel. Gold sitting around about 1,630. That's also down, by the way. We'll chat to Sasfin's Nesan Nair in a moment and find out why. And then the big one, the rand. I mean, at one point we thought we were safely tucked in the region of 14 rand to the US dollar. Not the case. Look at it now. 15 rand 60 will get you a US dollar, 17.19 for a euro. We passed the 20 rand mark against the British pound, 20 rand 10 cents. Well, let's get some insight now from Nesan Nair at Sasfin. Nesan, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Undoubtedly, there would be some panic for those invested on the JSE. I was asked as I walked into the office this morning, what do you do as the bloodbath continues? How does someone holding a pension right now, a pension fund, digest and process what's happening at the moment?
So there's inbuilt in any, whether you have a pension fund or a provident fund or a preservation fund, there's inbuilt risk management in the regulatory framework. And that means that a pension fund is not allowed to invest 100% into the stock market. And, you know, typically there are maximum limits that you can invest in shares, and there's amounts that you can invest in bonds, property, etc. So we call that the asset allocation. And the diversity that asset allocation brings to the investor protects them, provides almost a circuit breaker in times like this, where the stock market is down 10% in the last 5 days. You know, you can imagine that if you're nearing your pension and you take a 10% knock in the last 5 days, you know, it's going to have a serious impact on what you can draw down when you are ready to retire. So most pension funds in the country actually have a low equity rating anyway. Yep. And that was because the returns expected from the South African equity market are not expected to outperform in the short term. So you'll find that most pension funds have between sort of 50 and 60% in equity. Yep. So the 10% drop that we've seen in the week has a much lower impact in your pension fund because of this diversity.
Yeah. Nevertheless, you look at a chart, and I want to bring that up in a moment, the rand really taking a beating. And that chart will show you, Nesan, when we look at it, that as soon as this virus started getting really fearful among the economic fraternity, I mean, at one point we were speaking earlier, you said that when the virus broke out and it was exclusively in China, panic was and so forth.
Nobody thought it was a global problem.
But look at that chart at the moment now. The coronavirus, you can see that steep weakening against the US dollar there. And somewhere in the middle of the week, we had the national budget. We had a blurb with the strengthening of the rand against the US dollar. I'm assuming that was because certain facets of that budget was welcomed by the investor community. I would think the spending cuts was one of them. But then the coronavirus gets hold again and the rand weakens against the US dollar. What does it mean for us, though?
So I think, if you cast your mind back to late January when the news of this came out, stock markets were rising. You'll remember the S&P in America was hitting all-time highs almost every day.
Yeah.
There was a complacency about it because, as you mentioned, it seemed like this was a problem that was restricted to in China. And initially, anyway, the sentiment was that Chinese would get it under control. Over the weekend, the last weekend, news came out that it had spread to Italy and that Italy was actually under lockdown.
Yep.
It had spread to Iran, it was in South Korea, most recently in New Zealand. So I think the reality that this is now a global problem and each country has to deal with it, that reality sent shockwaves in the market to say that, well, we're going to see a slowdown in global growth as a result, notwithstanding China.
Will the rand get weaker? And I mean, I know you're not a magician to tell me that, but I mean, is it susceptible even further on this virus?
To me, if I look at what's important right now is we need to understand the rate of new infections. If that rate slows down,
Yep.
it gives the message that perhaps it's under control when a return to normality is down the road. If that rate continues to increase, especially in the rest of the world, then it gives me an indication that markets may tend to get weaker,
Yep.
emerging markets, which means a weaker rand. We could possibly go up to 16, maybe even over, as long as the market's perception is that this is not under control. So I think very important for the world right now to ensure that we get this under control.
Because you don't want inflationary impacts. It's the last thing we need in this country as we're embarking in this economic recovery. Listen, why did I see the mining shares perform so badly? Ordinarily, I would have thought gold is a safe haven. Everyone takes their money out, shoves it into gold. But gold is weakening. The mining shares are also weakening. What's happening?
This is what happens when there's a panic. There's just indiscriminate selling across the board.
Yeah.
You'll remember on Monday when news came out, there were shares like Fushini that were down 7-8%. No new company results. It's just that people were wanting to get risk off the table, and they would just sell whatever they have at whatever price that they can get to ensure that they are completely risk-free. So, one would expect that gold would actually go up, and it was actually during the course of the week. But I think right now, anybody that's holding risky assets is just cutting their exposure.
So we're going to have to leave it on that note. Nesan Nair from Sasfin, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, markets are taking a hit. We'll have to see for how long, Tomilo.